All right, my friends, what I have for you today is definitely a niche topic. So let's suppose that you are fighting on the surface of an airless moon or some other barren vacuum location in the BattleTech universe. What are the best tactics and what are the best units to bring with you? That is our topic for today. Now, the way that vacuum works in BattleTech is interesting. It's quirky. I'm not sure that it's especially realistic in terms of how things would actually go, but it's very flavorful and kind of cool. So I do really recommend trying a vacuum game sometime. It's fun and it's absolutely brutal, and mechs will just fall by the dozen. The thing I don't recommend, by the way, don't try the low gravity rules. The low gravity rules are crazy. They just vastly increase the speed of all the units for no physically plausible reason. I mean, it's not like the lunar rover was able to drive, 170 miles an hour on the surface of the moon or something. Low gravity does not actually speed up ground vehicles. So avoid those rules. But the vacuum rules, they're kind of cool. So what's different about fighting in vacuum? Well, there's one kind of key rule that makes a big difference. Fighting in vacuum in BattleTech is a bit like fighting underwater in BattleTech, because every time you're hit, that has a 1 in 6 chance of causing a breach on the location that you were hit. And if you get breached, then that location, I guess, gets vented out of air, and the air in the location is really important, apparently, in BattleTech to the functioning of the components in that location, or maybe they freeze or something is the idea. Anyway, if there's a breach, all the components in the breached location get destroyed. So this means if you breach a leg, for example, that mech is going to lose all of the leg actuators in that leg, and it'll be as if it had, basically it'll be like if it had a destroyed hip. Okay? If you breach a side torso, well, if the mech has an XL engine, it's going to be taking engine crits equal to the size of that engine. So an inner sphere XL mech, you breach the side torso, the mech's destroyed. You breach the center torso or the head, you're 100% destroyed. So as a consequence, what matters the most is exactly what you might expect. The more individual hits you get against a target, the more chances you have to breach. And 90% of the time, if you have something that has decently strong armor, it's going to get destroyed by a breach before you actually pierce that armor. So the best weapons in vacuum are cluster weapons, right? If you bring LBX autocannons, those are super great because they've got long range. If you bring SRMs, SRMs are good too. LRMs are pretty good. The more clusters you hit with, the more individual plinks you get against the mech that you're shooting at, the better. Now, how do you defend against this kind of vacuum attack, right? If your enemy's coming at you with short-range missiles or they're coming at you with LBXs in the vacuum, which is what they should do, what is your best defense? Well, for one thing, a standard engine is an excellent defense, because remember, if you have a standard engine, only a center torso breach is going to hurt your engine, whereas with an XL engine, especially an inner sphere one, your mech is many times more vulnerable to breaches, right? An inner sphere mech with an XL engine is going to get basically 3 times as many fatal breaches, almost, maybe like 2.5 times as many fatal breaches as a mech with a standard engine. Another thing that works is just not getting hit. So if you have high target movement modifiers, high speed units are extremely good in vacuum. They're some of the best, obviously, at avoiding getting shot. And they're also good at staying out of line of sight. Perfect protection in BattleTech is always staying out of line of sight of all your opponent's units. So the more you can get units that will move quickly and have the opportunity to stay out of line of sight, the better. And by the way, staying out of line of sight in vacuum is just a really decisive strategy. So another thing that's really good in vacuum is indirect fire. If you have indirect fire LRMs, if you can shoot your opponent and they can't shoot you, you got a lot of chances to get a breach, and they have no chances to get a breach. So indirect fire, if you can swing it, if you can make it work, that is a key to victory in vacuum environment BattleTech. And finally, the more units you have, the more mechs you have, the less it hurts you when any individual one of them gets breached. So numbers is a big defense. It's really, if you're going with, this is one of the few environments in BattleTech when going with large numbers of light mechs is better than going with smaller numbers of heavier mechs. You spam the light mechs in vacuum, and that's actually a lot of effective defense you're getting. The light mechs are fast for one thing usually, but even if they're not, the sheer numbers that you get from paying less battle value for your light mechs, that's defense by itself. The more you can bring to the field in vacuum, the better your defense is. So in that spirit, let me recommend some mechs. The first one that I have in mind is one that I've talked to you guys about before because it's one of those, it's kind of an obscure light mech that I like quite a bit. This is the Hollander variant that has an LB-10X. Now it goes fairly fast, okay, so you're going to have some evasion capability in vacuum, but more importantly, it's a light mech with a standard engine. You're not paying much battle value for this thing, so you can bring them in numbers. So if you get a bunch of these, that's a mob that will have plenty of offensive power to breach your opponent with those LB-10Xs. And the numbers and the standard engines effectively give you plenty of defense. So this is one of the best inner sphere units to bring in vacuum, I would say. The clans have a bunch of mechs that are just murder in vacuum because their LBX autocannons are really long ranged. And again, a long range LBX is just an amazing weapon in vacuum because if I can hit you and you can't hit me, that's exactly where I want to be when I'm in vacuum, even if the hits are doing teeny tiny plinking amounts of damage. So this is an environment where the Man-O-War or Gargoyle Prime just shines. The more of these you can take when you're in vacuum, the better. Okay, these are one of the just Cadillac mechs in vacuum because they've got the two LB-5Xs. You can really breach a lot of targets at long range. And then if something gets close enough to you, well, you've got two SRM-6s, and that's also a lot of excellent chances to breach. So Gargoyle Prime, cannot recommend it highly enough in vacuum. And it's pretty cheap in terms of battle value. If you want to go crazy, here's a mech that looks disgusting, right? Like I hate the looks of this mech, the Ryoken 2. It's just, the looks of it, it just makes me sick. Like it's everything that the Dark Age was not doing right. But it's really good in vacuum. 4 LB2Xs, that kind of long range plinking is just amazing in a vacuum setting. And it's got 2 LRM-15s. So if you get the opportunity for indirect fire, right, then you can land some of those indirect hits and it's just really good. So this mech, I hate it because I hate the looks of it, but I got to admit that in vacuum it's excellent. And if you want to go that indirect fire game, the standard longbow, the 0W, is actually a really good mech in vacuum because it doesn't waste too many battle value points on armor. Honestly, armor is not that great a defense in vacuum because, you'll just get breached eventually anyway. It doesn't super matter if you have really heavy armor. So this mech has what you need. It brings plenty of LRMs to the table and it doesn't waste a lot of battle value on armor. An indirect fire vehicle, of course, would be even better, like a tank. But the thing is that standard tanks can't operate in vacuum. So you're going to want something like this longbow. If you've never played a game in vacuum, it's a totally different game. It's crazy, and I highly recommend it. It's really, if you play it on the tabletop, there's a lot to keep track of with all those breach rolls. Mech will handle all of that for you. So playing a game in vacuum on Mech is awesome. I've had games, I play against the bot sometimes in kind of like a campaign mode, and I had a game in vacuum against the bot where I had like a company of inner sphere LRM mechs in trenches, and I just set it up so that a whole cluster of clan omnimechs would charge me, and like it's not that hard to just butcher even really powerful clan mechs in this situation. It's a really fun way to play. It's super different. It's super random, but I recommend that you give it a try once or twice. It's really kind of amazing.